The colonel's words hung in the air. No rescue attempts authorized. The K-9 unit is classified as acceptable loss. Maya Ree stood silently at the back of the command room, watching her fellow officers nod in agreement. No one noticed her slip away to study the weather maps alone, calculating a narrow window when the storm might offer brief respite. At 3:17 a.m. that night, as hurricane-force winds battered the base, security cameras captured a lone figure entering the hangar. The flight log terminal flashed briefly before being deliberately closed without an entry. The storm clouds gathered on the horizon, a dark wall of fury advancing toward the military base with unnerving speed. Weather reports scrolled across monitors in the command center, each update more alarming than the last. Record-breaking wind speeds, unprecedented rainfall, barometric pressure dropping faster than anyone had seen before. Staff Sergeant Maya Ree secured the final tie-down on a UH-60 Blackhawk, her movements efficient and practiced. The wind was already picking up, whipping her uniform against her body as she worked. "Hey, Ree, you're doing it wrong!" called Captain Reed, striding across the tarmac without waiting for her response. He nudged her aside and redid the tie-down exactly as she had done it. "See, like that, can't afford any damaged birds because of sloppy work?" Maya simply nodded her face, betraying nothing. After 3 years at Forward Operating Base Horizon, she had learned when speaking up only made things worse. Reed had never flown half the combat hours she had, but he wore the right patches and played poker with the right officers. "All aircraft secure, sir," she reported to the flight commander, who barely acknowledged her with a grunt before turning to slap Reed on the shoulder. "Good work today, Captain. We'll ride this one out and be back in the air in no time." Across the base, another team was preparing for deployment. Staff Sergeant Collins knelt beside his Belgian Malinois partner, Storm, checking the specialized harness and communication equipment. The dog's intelligent eyes remained fixed on Collins, alert and ready. "Just a routine recon, buddy," Collins said quietly, scratching behind Storm's ears. "We'll be back before the worst of it hits." Maya paused as she passed the K-9 staging area. "Hey, Collins, weather's turning faster than predicted. You sure about this mission?" Collins straightened. "Orders from above, apparently. There's some activity at the border outpost that can't wait. We'll be fine. Storm can handle anything, right, boy?" The dog's ears perked up at his name. "I'll keep an eye on the weather for you," Maya offered. "If things get dicey, I'll make some noise about extraction options." Collins smiled gratefully. "Always looking out for us, Ree. Storm appreciates it too, don't you?" The dog moved to Maya's side, pressing against her leg briefly before returning to attention. "Just be careful out there," Maya said, a frown crossing her face as she glanced again at the approaching storm front. 2 hours later, Maya stood at the back of the crowded command center, arms crossed, listening as communications with the K-9 unit became increasingly broken and distorted. "Unusual activity at the out," Collins' voice crackled through the static. "Multiple unkin subjects with require immediate—" The transmission cut out completely. The base commander, Colonel Richards, leaned over the communications officer's shoulder, tried to re-establish contact. After several failed attempts, the meteorologist spoke up. "Sir, the storm has intensified beyond all predictions. We're looking at Category 5 conditions within the hour. All communications in the sector will be impossible for at least 48 hours. Richards studied the weather map grimly. "What about extraction options?" Captain Reed stepped forward. "Sir, conditions already exceed safety parameters for flight operations. No aircraft could safely navigate those winds, especially not at night with zero visibility." Maya cleared her throat. "Sir, if I could suggest an alternative approach using the terrain features to—" "Not now, Ree," Richards cut her off without even looking in her direction. "We have experienced combat pilots assessing the situation." Maya fell silent, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. After several minutes of discussion, Richards straightened and addressed the room. "No rescue attempts are authorized until weather conditions improve. The K-9 unit will have to shelter in place." "Sir," a junior officer spoke up hesitantly, "what about Sergeant Collins and Storm?" Richards' expression hardened. "I don't like it any more than you do, Lieutenant, but I won't risk multiple lives and aircraft for one man and a dog. The K-9 unit is classified as acceptable loss under these circumstances." The room fell silent. Maya watched as officers nodded in reluctant agreement, none willing to challenge the colonel's decision. She slipped out quietly, unnoticed, as usual. In the empty corridor, Maya leaned against the wall, mind racing. She'd seen the satellite imagery of where Collins and Storm had been deployed. The border outpost was in a valley, partially sheltered from the main force of the storm. If they had found cover, they might survive. But what had Collins been trying to report before communications failed? The mess hall was nearly deserted. As Maya sat alone, spreading weather charts and topographical maps across the table, she traced potential flight paths with her finger, calculating wind vectors and terrain shielding effects. There was a pattern to every storm, a rhythm that could be read if you knew what to look for. "You're still thinking about them, aren't you?" Maya looked up to see Sergeant Garcia, the kennel master, standing with a cup of coffee. "May I?" He gestured to the seat across from her. Maya nodded, sliding some of her papers aside. "Storm is Collins' first deployment dog," Garcia said quietly. 3 years together, inseparable." "I know," Mia replied. "I've been helping with their training on my off hours." Garcia studied her for a moment. "Collins told me something once. Said if anything ever happened to him in the field, you were the only pilot he'd trust to come get Storm." Maya looked up surprised. "He said you understand dogs better than most people understand other people," Garcia continued. "He made you promise once, didn't he, to keep an eye on Storm when he's gone?" Maya's hands stilled on the maps. "Yes," she said finally, "I promised." Garcia nodded slowly, rising to leave. "Just thought you should know." He paused. "The storm's intensifying. They're saying it might be the worst in 50 years. After he left, Maya returned to her calculations. There was something there, a pattern in the storm structure. If her analysis was correct, there would be a brief window, an eye-like calm around 00300 hours that would coincide with a moonrise. It would last perhaps 30 minutes before conditions deteriorated again. The base loudspeaker crackled to life. "All personnel restrict movement to essential operations only. Base lockdown in effect as of 1800 hours." Later that evening, Maya approached the command center where Colonel Richards was reviewing damage reports with his staff. "Sir, I've been analyzing the storm pattern," she began, spreading her calculations on the table. "There's a window at approximately 00300 hours where a rescue flight might be possible if we use the eastern ridge for cover and time it with the temporary pressure equalization." Captain Reed snorted. "Are you serious, Ree? You think you found a magical path through a Category 5 hurricane that none of our meteorologists spotted?" Richards barely glanced at her work. "Staff Sergeant, I've made my decision. No flights are authorized, period. This isn't a training exercise where you get to play hero." "This isn't about heroics, sir. It's about not abandoning our people in the field," Maya insisted. "They're not people, Ree," Reed said with a dismissive laugh. "It's one handler and a dog, equipment, essentially." Maya stiffened. "Storm has saved more lives on this base than some of our pilots, sir." The room went silent. Richard's face darkened. "That's enough, Staff Sergeant. Return to your quarters immediately. That's an order." As Maya turned to leave, she overheard 2 officers speaking in low tones by the coffee station. "Convenient timing with this storm," one murmured, "after what Collins might have seen at that outpost. Clean slate," the other replied. "No questions asked." Maya's steps slowed, but she continued walking, her face betraying nothing. Back in her quarters, she sat on the edge of her bed, listening to the howling wind battering the windows. The conversation she'd overheard played on repeat in her mind. What had Collins stumbled upon? Why was no one fighting harder to bring them back? At 0200 hours, Maya made her decision. She changed into her flight suit, methodically packed a medical kit, extra water and emergency supplies into a waterproof bag. With practiced efficiency, she downloaded her calculated flight path to her tablet and secured it in her vest pocket. The base was eerily quiet as she made her way through the deserted corridors toward the hangar. Security was minimal. After all, who would be crazy enough to go outside in these conditions? The hangar door groaned against the wind as Maya slipped inside. Row upon row of secured aircraft greeted her, their profiles barely visible in the emergency lighting. She moved directly to Black Hawk No. 4, her regular bird when she was allowed to fly. She knew every inch of it, every quirk and sound. Pre-flight checks were done by feel as much as sight, her hands moving with certainty born of thousands of flight hours. The storm would make this the most dangerous flight of her career, but Maya felt strangely calm. This was what she was meant to do, what she had trained for all those years. At the flight log terminal, Maya hesitated. Protocol required all flights to be logged before departure. She started to enter the information, then stopped, her finger hovering over the screen. After a moment's consideration, she closed the program without logging anything. This flight wouldn't exist in any official capacity. At precisely 0317 hours, as the base slept and the storm raged, a lone Black Hawk helicopter rose into the darkness, immediately battling tremendous wind shear. For anyone watching, it would have seemed like madness or a death wish. For Maya, it was the only choice she could live with. No one had given her the order, but the mission wasn't over, not for her. The Black Hawk helicopter lurched violently as Maya guided it into the storm. Wind speeds exceeding 120 knots battered the aircraft from all sides, threatening to tear control from her hands with each gust. Rain pelted the windshield in sheets so thick the wipers were nearly useless. Through muscle memory and instinct, she kept the bird level, her eyes flicking between her instruments and the brief glimpses of terrain below whenever lightning illuminated the landscape. Normal pilots would have turned back already. Sane pilots never would have taken off. But Maya wasn't flying on standard protocols tonight. She was flying on calculations, training, and a promise kept. "Come on, baby, hold together," she murmured to the aircraft. As another violent downdraft dropped them several hundred feet in seconds, her stomach lurched, but her hands remained steady on the controls, compensating with practiced precision. She'd flown worse conditions in Afghanistan, though not by much. The navigation system was struggling to maintain accuracy in the electromagnetic interference from the lightning, so Maya relied primarily on terrain features and her memorized flight path. The eastern ridge would provide some shelter from the worst crosswinds if she could just reach it. 20 minutes into the flight, Maya found the pattern she'd predicted, a brief stabilization in the storm's intensity as the eye wall began to form. It wasn't calm by any standard definition, but compared to what she'd just flown through, it felt almost manageable. This window would last perhaps 30 minutes before conditions deteriorated again, giving her precious little time to locate Collins and Storm. Maya reduced altitude, flying dangerously close to the ridgeline, but protected somewhat from the wind shear that threatened to flip the aircraft at higher elevations. Her night vision equipment gave the terrain an eerie green glow, shadows moving like living things in the storm. The border outpost would be just beyond the next valley. Maya squinted through the downpour, searching for any sign of the facility where Collins and Storm had been deployed. When lightning flashed again, she caught a glimpse of something that didn't match the natural terrain, debris scattered across a hillside. Banking the helicopter into a dangerous turn, she circled back for a better look. The outpost had been damaged, part of its roof torn away by the storm. No lights, no movement visible. Maya keyed her radio, knowing it was likely futile. "Sergeant Collins, this is Black Hawk 4. Do you copy?" Nothing but static answered her. With fuel levels already concerning and the brief window of navigable weather closing, Maya searched for a landing zone close to the outpost. There was a small clearing about 200 yards away that might work, though landing in these winds would push her skills to their limit. She brought the Black Hawk into a hover, fighting constant wind gusts that threatened to slam the aircraft into the nearby trees. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold. This was the moment of maximum vulnerability, a helicopter at low altitude, in hover, during a storm, a textbook recipe for disaster. With exquisite control, Maya lowered the aircraft the final few feet, feeling rather than seeing when the wheels made contact with the muddy ground. She kept the rotors engaged, ready to lift off instantly if the wind threatened to roll them. Securing her helmet and grabbing her emergency pack, Maya made the difficult decision to leave the helicopter running. Shutting down meant potentially not being able to restart in these conditions, but leaving it running risked damage to an unattended aircraft. The mission came first. She needed that helicopter operational for extraction. The moment Maya stepped outside, the full force of the storm hit her like a physical blow. Rain stung her face like needles, and the wind nearly knocked her off her feet. Leaning into it, she began making her way toward the outpost, powerful flashlight cutting through the darkness. The outpost was in worse condition than it had appeared from the air. Part of the roof had collapsed, and the main door hung from a single hinge. Inside, equipment was scattered and water pooled on the floor, but no sign of Collins or Storm. "Collins!" Maya shouted over the wind. "Storm!" When no response came, she began a methodical search of the small outpost. In what appeared to be a communications room, she found signs of a hasty departure, a half-empty coffee cup, a jacket still hanging on a chair. On the desk sat a damaged tablet, its screen cracked but still partially functional. Maya powered it on, revealing a series of images and a truncated text message that Collins had apparently been trying to send. "Unauthorized shipment observed at coordinate marker 227. Weapons cache, possible internal involvement, requesting immediate X." The message ended there. Maya's blood ran cold as she looked at the accompanying images, crates of weapons being loaded into unmarked vehicles, and in one photo, barely visible but unmistakable, was Colonel Richards, speaking with men Maya didn't recognize. This wasn't a routine reconnaissance mission. Collins and Storm had stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see, and now a convenient storm had made them disappear. A sound outside the doorway made Maya spin around, hand instinctively reaching for her sidearm. She froze when she saw a pair of reflective eyes in her flashlight beam. "Storm!" she called softly. The Belgian Malinois stepped cautiously into the room, soaking wet and limping slightly, but very much alive. The dog regarded Maya wearily for a moment, then recognition sparked in his intelligent eyes. "Hey, buddy," Maya said, kneeling slowly. "Where's Collins?" Storm whined and turned, clearly wanting her to follow. Maya quickly copied the tablet's data to her own device before following the dog out into the storm again. Storm led her down a ravine about 20 yards from the outpost, navigating the slippery terrain with determination despite his injured paw. At the bottom, partially sheltered by an overhanging rock face, lay Sergeant Collins, unconscious but breathing. Maya's medical training kicked in as she assessed his condition. Concussion, probably from falling debris, and a broken arm, but no life-threatening injuries that she could identify. The real danger was exposure. Even in his insulated gear, the cold rain had already begun to lower his body temperature dangerously. "We're going to get you out of here," Maya told the unconscious man, as she administered emergency first aid. Storm stayed close, licking Collins' face occasionally as if trying to wake him. Creating a makeshift stretcher from her emergency kit was challenging in the howling wind, but Maya worked quickly and efficiently. The real problem would be getting Collins back to the helicopter. He outweighed her considerably, and dragging the stretcher uphill through mud and debris would be nearly impossible alone. Storm seemed to understand the problem. The dog positioned himself at the head of the stretcher, gripping a strap in his teeth and pulling whenever Maya lifted the rear end. "Good boy," Maya encouraged, as they began the grueling journey back to the helicopter. "We're a team now." Every step was a battle against mud, wind, and exhaustion. Twice Maya slipped and fell, and once the wind nearly rolled Collins off the stretcher. By the time they reached the clearing where the Black Hawk waited, Maya's muscles burned with fatigue. And even Storm was showing signs of exhaustion. The helicopter had sustained minor damage from debris while unattended, but nothing that would prevent flight. Loading Collins required all of Mia's remaining strength, but finally she secured him as comfortably as possible. Storm jumped in without prompting, taking up position beside his handler, watchful and protective. As Mia strapped herself back into the pilot's seat, she checked her fuel gauges and swore under her breath. The extended running time had burned precious fuel, leaving their reserves critically low. The return journey would need to be perfect, no room for detours, no margin for error. The brief window of relatively stable weather had passed, meaning the flight back would be even more dangerous than the journey out. Maya took a deep breath, centered herself, and began the startup sequence for departure. "Hang on," she told her passengers, though only Storm was conscious to hear her. "This might get rough." The Black Hawk lifted unsteadily into the raging storm, immediately caught in violent turbulence that threatened to slam them back to the ground. Maya fought the controls, calling on every hour of flight experience she possessed to keep them airborne. The journey back was a blur of alarms, violent motion, and constant adjustment. Warning lights flashed as the aircraft was pushed beyond its design limitations. The fuel indicator moved toward empty with frightening speed. Twice they came so close to crashing that Maya could see individual trees whipping past beneath them. With the base just 15 minutes away, a new alarm sounded: fuel critical. They were running on fumes now, and the storm showed no signs of abating. Maya reduced altitude further, flying dangerously close to the terrain to save what little fuel remained by avoiding headwinds. "Come on," she whispered to the struggling aircraft, "just a little farther." Storm whined from the back, sensing their precarious situation. In response, Maya reached back with one hand, briefly touching the dog's head. "We didn't come this far to fail, now did we?" The lights of the base appeared through the rain-streaked windshield, a welcome sight that Maya had worried she might never see again. She radioed to the tower, not caring anymore about the unauthorized flight. "Base, this is Black Hawk 4 on emergency approach. One wounded, critical fuel situation. Request immediate landing clearance." The shocked response from the tower controller almost made her smile. "Black Hawk 4, who is this? No flights are authorized. This is Staff Sergeant Ree. I have Sergeant Collins and K9 Storm on board. Fuel critical. Cleared the pad." Whether from the urgency in her voice or sheer surprise, the controller complied. "Cleared for emergency landing. Medical standing by." As Maya guided the dying helicopter toward the landing pad, the fuel indicator hit empty. The engine sputtered once, twice, and held just long enough for her to set the aircraft down hard, but safely on the tarmac. Only then did she allow herself to exhale. Storm nudged her arm with his nose, as if saying, "Thank you." "Mission accomplished, buddy," Mia said quietly, ruffling the dog's wet fur. "But something tells me our troubles are just beginning." Dawn broke over the base. The storm's fury slightly abated, though rain still fell steadily from dark clouds. Personnel emerged from barracks and shelters to assess the damage. Downed power lines, debris scattered across the tarmac, a communications tower tilting precariously to one side. It was in this moment of stunned evaluation that the impossible happened. A battered Black Hawk helicopter appeared through the low cloud cover, its normally smooth approach replaced by a stuttering descent that spoke of critical mechanical issues. What the hell? The tower controller grabbed his binoculars. That's Black Hawk 4. It's not even logged out. The helicopter descended toward the landing pad, its engine making alarming noises, before cutting out entirely about 15 feet above the ground. The aircraft dropped the remaining distance, landing hard, but remaining upright, its rotors slowing to a stop. A crowd began to gather as medical personnel rushed toward the helicopter. The side door slid open, and to everyone's astonishment, a Belgian Malinois, a military dog, limped out, soaking wet, but alive. Medics immediately crowded around the door, extracting a stretcher bearing the unconscious form of Sergeant Collins. Finally, a figure emerged from the pilot's seat. Staff Sergeant Maya Ree, drenched and exhausted, but standing tall. Her flight suit was caked with mud, her face marked with strain, but her eyes remained clear and focused as she helped direct the medics with Collins. A hush fell over the gathered personnel, a mixture of shock and dawning respect visible on many faces. The silence was broken by the angry voice of Colonel Richards pushing through the crowd. Staff Sergeant Ree, what is the meaning of this? You stole military equipment, violated direct orders, and endangered yourself and this base. Richard's face was flushed with rage as he approached. You are hereby relieved of duty pending court-martial proceedings. Captain Reed followed close behind, barely concealing his satisfaction. I told you she was unstable, sir, ever since Kandahar. Maya stood her ground, her voice calm despite her exhaustion. Colonel Richards, I have evidence you need to see. The only thing I need to see is you in custody, Richards snapped. Military police detained Staff Sergeant Ree immediately. Two MPs moved forward uncertainly, but stopped when Storm positioned himself between them and Maya, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Sir, Maya continued, reaching slowly into her vest pocket and removing the data tablet. Sergeant Collins discovered something at the border outpost, something he wasn't supposed to see. Richard's expression flickered briefly. Whatever delusion you're operating under, Ree, can be addressed during your court-martial. I don't think so, sir. Maya's voice lasted. Carried across the now silent landing area, she held up the tablet, its screen visible to the gathering crowd. Unauthorized weapon shipments identified by Collins and captured by Storm's specialized camera caller. With you in the frame, sir. The color drained from Richard's face. Captain Reed lunged forward, suddenly attempting to grab the tablet, but Storm was faster, intercepting him with a warning snap that sent him stumbling backward. You have no idea what you're interfering with, Ree hissed, his composure cracking. This is a matter of national security. Selling weapons to non-allied forces is treason, sir, Mia replied steadily, not national security. The tension was broken by a new voice, sharp, authoritative. That's quite enough, Colonel. A woman in civilian clothes approached, flanked by two serious-looking men in unmarked tactical gear. She held up credentials that made Richards step back involuntarily. Intelligence Officer Sarah Blackwood, she announced, her gaze sweeping over the scene. Colonel Richards, Captain Reed, you are both being detained pending investigation into weapons trafficking and conspiracy charges. Richard's face contorted with fury. This is absurd. Who authorized this? I did, said a quiet voice from behind Blackwood. A silver-haired man in the uniform of a general stepped forward. General Marcus Wallace, Special Operations Command. And I believe you know Staff Sergeant Ree, or should I say Captain Ree of Special Operations Aviation Regiment. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Mia straightened to attention, though the effort clearly cost her. Captain Ree has been undercover at this base for 14 months, Wallace continued, investigating reports of weapons disappearing from military shipments. We had suspicions but lacked concrete evidence until now. Blackwood nodded. Captain Ree wasn't supposed to break her cover, but when Collins and his canine partner accidentally stumbled onto your operation, you made sure they were sent out just as the storm was hitting. Convenient timing. You left them for dead, Mia said quietly to Richards, but you didn't count on Storm's camera collar or Collins' determination to get the evidence back. Or on Captain Ree's flying abilities, Wallace added, one of the best helicopter pilots in the special operations community. The backup pilot you've been dismissing for over a year has more combat flight hours than most of your senior aviators combined. As military police took Richards and Reed into custody, Sergeant Garcia approached with Storm at his side. The dog immediately moved to Maya, pressing against her leg. Collins is stable, Garcia reported. Concussion, broken arm, exposure, but he'll make it, thanks to you. Maya knelt, despite her exhaustion, running her hands over Storm to check him more thoroughly for injuries. Thanks to Storm, too. He led me to Collins, helped get him back to the helicopter. General Wallace watched this interaction with approval. That was one hell of a flight, Captain, even by your standards. Maya looked up. Storm and Collins were ours, sir. We don't leave our people behind. No, we don't, Wallace agreed. He looked around at the assembled personnel, many of whom were watching Maya with newfound respect. Which is why I'm pleased to announce that effective immediately, Captain Maya Ree will be assuming temporary command of aviation operations at this base pending permanent appointments. The stunned silence was broken by Sergeant Garcia, who began to applaud. Others quickly joined in, the sound swelling across the tarmac. Maya stood, visibly uncomfortable with the attention, but standing straight nonetheless. If it's all the same to you, sir, she said quietly to Wallace, I'd prefer a different assignment once things are stabilized here. Wallace raised an eyebrow. You've earned your pick of postings, Captain. What did you have in mind? Maya looked down at Storm, who sat alertly at her side. I'd like to develop a canine air rescue program. Combine my flying skills with specialized canine operations. I think we've proven the concept works. The general smiled. I think that can be arranged. 1 year later, Maya stood in the newly renovated hangar, watching as her team prepared for a training mission. 4 specialized Blackhawks sat ready, each modified with equipment for canine operations. Storm, now fully recovered and officially assigned as Maya's partner, waited patiently by her side, his new tactical vest equipped with the latest communication and rescue gear. Captain Ree, called one of her pilots, a young woman who had specifically requested transfer to the Canine Air Rescue Unit. Weather reports are showing turbulence along the northern route. Should we adjust our training parameters? Maya smiled a little. A little turbulence never stopped us before, did it, Storm? The dog's ears perked up at his name, tail wagging slightly in anticipation of the flight to come. On the wall of the hangar hung a simple plaque commemorating what was now known throughout the military as the Storm Flight, the impossible rescue mission that had exposed corruption and sparked the creation of the Specialized Canine Air Rescue Division. Beneath it, a quote, "Courage isn't flying when conditions are perfect. It's flying when no one else will." "Captain," a communications officer called from across the hangar, "we've got a situation developing in the eastern sector. Flash flooding has cut off a border patrol unit. Weather conditions making conventional rescue difficult." Maya exchanged a look with Storm, seeing the same determination reflected in the dog's eyes that she felt herself. Without hesitation, she moved toward her helicopter, her team falling into practiced formation around her. "Call it in," she ordered crisply. "Canine Air Rescue is responding." As the hangar doors opened to the morning light, Maya settled into the pilot's seat, Storm taking his position beside her. The helicopter lifted smoothly into the air, rising toward storm clouds gathering on the horizon. This time, she wasn't flying alone. This time, she was exactly where she was meant to.